After 10 years of bookbinding, I've accumulated a lot of scrap materials. So I thought it might be fun to give myself the challenge of creating a book made entirely out of scraps. Let's see what I can make using what I already have. So the first thing we're going to need to find is some book board. We're going to dig through here and just see if there's anything that we have that we can get a front, a back, and a spine out of. Definitely want to see if we can get something that has the grain going the right way. So I might just start separating this by grain. Like for example, this one, the grain is running this way. You see it's more difficult to flex it against the grain like this. So put that there. See, this one also runs like this. This one I already have marked. I typically mark it when I'm cutting out from my larger boards which way the grain runs, so that when I do end up with scraps, I can still see at a glance where my grain is. Put that one over there. And this one, this might be a good size. This looks about the size of my pocket notebooks. So this is a good one to hold on to. So I'm just going to keep going through and see what horizontal pieces I have, what vertical pieces I have, and that will determine, I think, the size of our book. And then maybe we can see a couple different options, and if we have any paper scraps that will work for a text block for that size book. I like these two kind of match actually. I'm gonna put those off to the side. Those might work. This too. I feel like these were all cut from the same piece in the same project at some point. Wonder, it looks like I could get a piece cut from this to match this size. So it looks like we have maybe like a vertical book option or a horizontal option, just from what I've come across so far. And then we can use any of these extra pieces for the spines of the books. So I think we're gonna stick with that for now. Let's see what we can work with here. Okay, so now let's start looking for some paper we can use. Now we're gonna need paper for the text block itself, as well as the end papers, which will help us secure the text block to the cover. These are the two sizes that we're gonna go with. See what we can work with. So I do keep scrap paper from almost every project. I try to only toss and recycle what I absolutely cannot use. And even some of my very fine small pieces of paper from text block trimmings or even end paper trimmings, I do save those, and sometimes I will turn them into paper pulp and make some of my own paper out of them. But anything bigger I will throw into this little bin, and typically I use them for decorative pieces. Like sometimes I'll just cut this out, sometimes I'll make birthday tags for gifts, or I might even use something like this as just a gluing sheet. But any of my larger scraps will end up in this bin, so we have a lot to sort through. Something like this might work over here. These sizes are pretty cool, but they're different colors, because those could definitely work with that one. Don't know about this, but we do have a couple of these pink sheets. It looks like I tried to use them as sort of like a template before, or like a little practice run. We don't have a lot of them though, I don't think. Alright, let's see what this is. This looks like some leftover text paper from one of my photo albums, because this was definitely from an 11 by 17 as opposed to an 8.5 by 11. And I think I might have more of those too. I think this is from that as well. Oh, we found more of these. Oh, here we go. I think these are the rest of the trimmings from one of the photo albums. So this could actually work well, maybe for this size. Yeah, this will work for this book. So how many of these do we have? Got one. We can also use this probably. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11. We could do maybe 5 signatures of 2 sheets. That's a possibility. Okay, so this is definitely getting somewhere. I think we're leaning towards this horizontal book. Let's start looking for some end papers that might work for this. Oh. We have 2 of these. These look nice, and these are about the same height, so this should work. Let's double check. Yeah, this could make a great end paper. Okay, so there's an option. This is really cool. I like the oh, and we do have 2 of these, so this is another option. Okay, Olive or Navy. We're getting somewhere. I'm gonna keep looking for some more options just because we're gonna have to also see what cover materials we have. And I wanna see as many different color possibilities we can get from our end papers, just in case a cover material doesn't work with one of the end papers. Looks like we have some gold options too. So you've probably seen these papers before in my videos. These are scraps that I end up using when I trim my text blocks on my large guillotine. So I will slide these on the bottom and the top of my text block just to protect them from the trimming guard that holds it in place while I cut. That way it doesn't leave any marks or any indents on the text block itself. This is such a pretty paper. This is actually a paper I purchased for a bookbinding project when I was in college 10 years ago, which is crazy. But I still have some of that left over. And I still have that book somewhere from that college project. That's a nice size sheet of paper. Let's pull that out. Oh. So we got some more of this paper. This is nice. What are these? We have a lot of different color options here. I do not know. I really like this one. I don't know what these papers are from. It doesn't look like they've been used or trimmed or anything, but I do see some like little indents, so maybe I threw them in here because they were damaged. But let's take all of these out because these could be really useful. Let's see, we have a couple more pieces of this. Oh, this is a larger piece. This could actually work over here with this one. That could be an end paper or a cover paper. Yeah, I'm gonna pull that out. And another piece. Okay. I think we have a good amount of options out here right now. So let's get rid of this and let's see what we have. Okay, so we have this horizontal book, we have this pocket-sized vertical book. This could definitely work over here. Like this could also work for end papers. I kind of like these colors together too. There's a little bit of this like eggplanty running through the red. Let's save those. Don't know about these. These are really fun colors, but I don't know if they really go with any of the other papers we pulled out. So we'll take those out. Okay. Now we have these like golds, olives, and navies over here. You know what? We still need text paper over here. We'll have to take another look in the bin, see if we can get something for a text block this size. Again, I know we had these. I don't think that is sufficient enough for a book. Nope. I think I found something. This is a good stack. It says like square, but it should fit, right? Oh, that's plenty. It can't be folded though. We'd have to make it really skinny. It'd be quite a skinny book. But we could do perfect binding with just a glued spine instead of a sewn spine. And that should be a sufficient little book. Okay, we have some options. So now you're gonna get a little behind the scenes of how messy my bookbinding storage can get. In this drawer, I have a lot of my book cloth. I have some paper in here. Any of my larger rolls of materials I keep in this drawer, along with materials to make my book cloth, as well as some like extra fabric. So what I'm hoping we can do is find some scraps of book cloth in here that still can work with this project, but will qualify as a scrap and not a super large piece that I cut down. So anything like this, I'm not going to try to use because I do want this to be made entirely from scraps. And I do keep some scraps in here. I like to use scraps for testing on my laser printer, for testing with certain other materials. And I do have some scraps already from larger books that I've cut down. We have like a navy, this bright red, a coral, a red. I'm already seeing some of these colors might work for the papers we picked out. This could potentially work. This like green, it's almost olive, maybe a little brighter. Another red scrap. I do have black as well. That's a possibility. I made some watermelon books a couple summers ago. I don't think those will work with any of the papers we picked out. I think the rest in here might be larger sheets. I do have this green, but again, those are quite large. Let's take a look at what we have already and see if any of these scraps will work. Okay, so I'm already seeing that this red goes really well with this paper. We also have this blue that could go well with these colors. We also have this green that could go well with either of these. I'm really feeling this color palette. I don't know if I like how bright these are. So let's stick with these for now. I think for these, This is our spine. We should have enough room to get onto the cover. And then we even have enough paper to make a cover with this. And then I think we can use this for the end papers. That works out. I think we have a good direction for this option. So this book is set. Now let's look at this option. So we have a decent amount for the text block. We need to figure out the cover. If we have this as our spine, like this option, we will still need a paper for the rest of the cover, because neither of these will be enough to cover. So whether we go with green or blue, we're going to need paper for the rest of the cover. I need to take one more look in my bin of scrap paper to see if we have anything that is big enough to cover the rest of these covers and that can match either this sort of olivey gold tone or this navy-ish blue tone. So I'm going to take a quick look and see what we have. Okay, I did find these two. This scrap piece is a bit shorter than this one, but it might work just barely. We could end up trimming these down a bit to make this fit, just to give us a bit more working room. Now the question is, do we like the blue or do we like the olive? Because if you look at this, there is olive in the paper design in the leaves, but then we also have some blue flowers. So I feel like this could really work with either option, whether we go with the olive or the navy. And if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that when it comes to decisions like this, I'm very indecisive. So I think I'm going to ask Instagram and see what my followers think is the best option. So let me post that and give them some time to come up with feedback. And maybe we can get started with this book since this one is ready to go. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is figure out how big we need to make our text block. Typically, I will just make the text block however I need to, and then I will cut my book boards to size depending on the measurements my text block comes out to. But because we are working with scraps, we already have this size kind of determined for us. This is our smallest piece, and we're going to cut down the other scraps to this size. So we can see this is 4 by 5.5. So what we'll do is we will cut this down, and then we will wait to cut out the spine until we have our text block finished, because that measurement will depend on the size of our finished text block. So we want our width of our text block to be 4 inches, the same width as our cover, because it will sit within the hinge a bit against the spine, which will give us a nice edge here. And then we can bring it down 1/4 inch from the height. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.25 can be the height of our text block. So now that we have that, we can start putting together our text block. Now we do have a couple different sized papers, which isn't a problem. And it looks like some of these have some markings on them. The edges might be a little bit dinged up, but that's okay. Let me just see. Oh, there we go. That seemed to make them square out. I didn't even count how many we have here. Let's see.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37.
We have 37 sheets here, which is a very bizarre amount of pages for a book. But in the interest of using up my scraps, I'm not going to remove any pages to make it a rounded number. I think we're just gonna go with 37 this time. And it'll be a one of a kind because I don't think I'll ever make another book with 37 pages again. So again, we're going with 4 inches wide. So we're gonna trim here by 5 1/4. And are these already at 5 1/4? And we could trim it down a bit, but it is looking like a good size. So we really only have to trim one side, but I think we're gonna trim just a hair off the top as well. So now we have it cut to our width, and I did want to take down just a little bit off the top, again, just to give it some more breathing room. This should be a good size to go in our notebook. Now that we have the pages of our text block, we need to add our end papers before we can glue the spine. So we're going to use this eggplanty colored paper that we found in the scrap bin. We're going to need 2 sheets, one for each end of the book. They're going to be the same height as this text block, and then they need to be double the width because we are going to fold it like that. We need the width, because this is 4 inches, we need this to be 8 inches, which works out well because this should be an 8.5 by 11. So we will just trim off 1/2 inch, and then the height should now be just under 5 1/4. So 8 by 5 1/4. We're gonna need 2 of those. Now we have our 2 end sheets, and we're going to fold them in half. Our text block is ready to be glued. All right, so I've grabbed 2 little scraps of paper from my bin, as well as some binder clips. And then I'm going to tear these in half so I have 4 pieces. And I'm just going to use these to protect my text block from indentations from the binder clips. Let's get this evened out. And then we're going to put our binder clips pretty close to the spine just to keep it squished together for when we start adding our layers of glue. So what I'm doing here is just propping up my text block so it's easier to glue the spine and let it dry. I'm just going to take some PVA glue and apply it to my spine. And I'm not going to do super thick layers. I'm going to do about 5 pretty thin layers. So I'm going to first spread it across the entire spine. And then I'm actually going to bend the spine forward so that the paper is kind of at an angle. And then I'm going to apply more glue. Then I'm going to bend it the other way and do the same thing. And this way the glue is actually getting a little bit in between each of the pages. And it's not sitting just directly on the spine itself. And then we're gonna let this dry to the touch. It'll take about 10 to 20 minutes, and then we're gonna apply another layer. Now we're gonna go in with a second layer of glue, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna get some of the glue on the spine, and then we're gonna bend the spine towards me, and then bend it the other way. And we'll wait for this to dry again. So now I'm going to add my final layer of glue to the spine, and I'm also going to add on a layer of kozo paper. So I have this scrap piece of kozo paper. It's a Japanese paper with very fine fibers, so it's very durable and very strong, and it'll just add an extra bit of structure to our spine. I use this as backing on my book cloth when I make my own cloth. I put down an adhesive layer and then I back it with this kozo paper so that it can easily secure to my book boards. So I do have this little scrap piece, and I'm just going to cut a portion that will fit over the spine. This doesn't have to be perfect. And then we're just going to make it a bit wider than the spine itself, and it can wrap around to the end papers. Then once again, I'm just going to add my last layer of glue. And then I'm going to lay the kozo right on top. Just press it down. And then I'm just going to add one more quick layer of glue on top of this kozo to keep it secured so that it dries nicely to the spine. Now that our text block is dry and we have all of our glue on here, I'm going to finish off the text block by just trimming down the top and bottom. So as you can see, we still have a little bit of unevenness here. The text block kind of shifted a bit as I was setting it up to be glued, which is fine, that happens. So I'm just going to give it one more trim with the utility knife so we can square off these edges. Now before I make a cover and glue in the text block, I am going to finish off the spine. The last thing I'm going to do is add some headbands. Now headbands are this piece of fabric that typically goes at the head and the tail of the spine. It gets glued on like that. And for the purpose of this video, I'm going to try to make my own headbands. Even though I think this color would be perfect, we are going to try and make them ourselves. And I think we're going to use what we're using on the spine of our cover. I think we can try and repurpose a piece of this to make our headbands. And as I was going through my ribbon bin, I did find this twine. And this is a decent sized string of twine, but we really only need a couple inches. I think what I'm gonna do is add some kozo to this cloth and then glue it down, fold it over. So I still have this scrap piece of kozo paper, and what we're gonna do is just cut off a good amount of this book cloth. I think this is about all we need. And then we will use this for our cover. So I've got my PVA glue, and I think what I'm going to do is first add some kozo to the cloth. And then we're going to take this twine and cut it down to what we need. So now that we have our twine, I think I'm just going to put glue along the entire spread of kozo. And then my twine will go right on top as I fold it over. I'm also going to use a bone folder so that I can get a nice crease on the twine once it's sandwiched in between the book cloth. So we're going to set the twine right in the middle and fold over our book cloth. And then I'm just using my bone folder to squish it down and make sure this piece has a nice rounded edge. Okay, I think this is looking pretty good. I'm going to let it dry for a few minutes under some weight. Now that our headband is ready to go, we are going to prop up our text block again so that we can finalize the spine. There's a few things I need to add to the spine now. First, we need to cut out the right measurements of the headband. So we're going to need two pieces, one for the head and one for the tail. So I'm going to glue down my headbands at the head and the tail of the spine. And then once I'm finished with that, I'm going to add one more layer to this entire spine for structure. I use this Mole super cloth. And obviously this is a big piece, so I'm not going to use this one. But luckily I do keep some scraps. I don't know what I thought I would ever be able to use this for, or even this for. Look how tiny this is. But I kept some scraps for whatever reason, and I think they're going to come in handy today. This one is actually a good size. It doesn't quite fit the entire spine, but it's going to be, I think, just long enough for our purpose. So I'm going to cut it a little wider than the spine so it will wrap around. And then this is going to be the finishing piece. So this will go over the top of the headbands as well. So now I'm just going to add some glue to the spine right at the top. I'm also going to add a little bit directly on the headband. And then I'm going to place it on so that the twine part sits just over the top of the text block. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other end. And I'm going to add a little bit more glue right over top so that it's sealed in. And then we're going to add our mole. So I'm going to add glue to the rest of the spine and then just center this over the spine and press it down with my fingers. Then add one last layer of glue right on top. As I push it down, I'm not using a ton of glue on the sides, it's just a little excess. but that's going to be enough just to get it in position. And we'll have it fully glued down once we case it in. So now we're going to let this dry, and then we can start working on our case. Now that our text block is dried and ready to go, we can start making our case for the book. So first we just need to measure the final dimensions of this text block so we can make the proper sized cuts to our book boards. So the width is still at 4 inches and it's at 5 inches tall. So we need our book board covers for the front and back to be 4 inches wide, which is what this is. So this one's already the right width. And we need the height to be about 1/4 inch over the height of our text block. So 5 1/4, we just need to trim this down about 1/4 inch. So now we need to make another cover piece with the same dimensions. So now we have our front and our back covers, and these do line up. Those look good. What we need now is the spine. So for our spine, we want basically the width of the spine plus the width of the covers. So we can take these as a template. Let's see, will this piece work? Our little scrap piece will actually make the perfect spine size. So we don't have to measure and cut another piece, we can just use this. So we can put our text block aside now, and we will put our book cloth and paper on the cover pieces. So we know we're going to use this for the spine portion. And what we can do to find our center is just fold and pinch at the top and bottom of the piece. Then we can draw a nice straight line through this to mark our center point. So I'm going to set my paper aside and start lining up just the book cloth portion. So now I'm going to use my glue and brush to set down the spine piece. I'm just going to make sure it's nice and centered on the book cloth. Now I'm going to add the 2 cover pieces. And I'm just going to lay down a scrap gluing sheet behind this. And I also have this spacer that I like to use. It's just under 1/4 inch. It's 15 millimeters wide. So that'll just go in here, and then I can butt the cover board up right against it and make sure we're all square. So what I'm going to do is just add some glue to the book cloth right on the edge here. Then I can take my spacer and my cover piece, just set that in there. Then once it's in, I can take this out, and we'll do the same thing to the other side. I'm just going to use my finger to make sure there's no air bubbles in here. So now we're going to need the paper to fill in the rest of this cover section. With a couple different size scraps, it looks like this one will work. Let me just make sure there's enough overhang to wrap it. Yep, that one will work. I think this is going to be too skinny. So we're going to have to cut down one of these. I think this one has a lot of nice gold on it, so we're going to go with this area. So I'm just going to cut it down to about the same size as this. Okay, and this should give us plenty to work with. So now what I need to do is just add some glue to the rest of this cover board. And I do want it to overlap the book cloth just a hair. So I'm going to butt up my glue right next to the book cloth. I can go over just a little bit so that we don't have any gaps when we apply the paper to the cover. Okay, so I'm going to take my gold shiny piece and I'm going to line it up with the bottom of this book cloth here. It doesn't have to be exact. And then I'm going to slowly push it over. And a little bit too much glue on this one, but that's okay. We're just going to try to wipe it off with our finger, and it should be fine when it dries. Now we're going to trim off the excess. And I like to leave about a ½ inch on each side. To cut your corners, you can do it by eye. You could just snip it off with scissors or with a blade. If you're going to do it by eye, the best practice is to leave a little gap in the corner about the width of your book board. So if you have a scrap piece, this is just one of my gap spacers that I use, you can use that as a guide. Lately, I've been using one of these little templates, so I can just put it on the corner of my board and quickly make a cut. The last thing to do for our cover is just fold over the edges. I like to start with gluing down the long sides first because those tend to be the most difficult since there's more material to fold over. And you can fold this over a bunch of different ways, but I like to just press it onto the table and roll it over to the other side. That way I get a nice crease here. Okay, and now I'm going to do the shorter sides. Now when you do the other sides, it's important to tuck in the corners a bit, like you're folding a present. That way you don't have any extra book cloth or paper. None of it is poking out. And you have a neat, crisp corner. So now our case is done, and it's time for the moment of truth. Let's grab our text block and make sure that this fits properly in our case. So I'm going to set this up in the case and get it in position. Now I'm going to apply glue to this top page. And as I'm applying this glue, we are gluing down the rest of this super cloth that was on our spine and wrapped over the edge. I'm just going to hold this text block in place while I fold the cover over and close the book. I'm just going to add a bit of pressure with my hands and then open the book. Looks like we got a little bit of glue. And at this point, you can reposition the text block if needed. It's like I was just a little bit crooked. And then I'm going to use a bone folder just to secure this and make sure we have no air bubbles on this end page. Now that it's cased in, I'm going to press it. But before I press it, I'm going to add just some wax paper in between the end pages, just so that while the glue dries, it doesn't get on the text block at all, and we won't have problems with the pages sticking together. So all I'm going to do is put a piece of book board on top of this and then add some weight to it. You can use weight plates, books, bricks, whatever you have on hand, just to apply weight to this while the glue dries. That way you will prevent any warping on the book covers. I like to dry mine overnight so that they have ample time for the glue to dry properly. Now that our book is done in the press, I'm just going to do some finishing touches to it. So what I like to do with my books after taking them out of the press is just break in the spine a little bit by over flexing the covers. And then I'm just going to take my bone folder and make the shoulder hinges a little more prominent. And then the last thing I do to all my books is emboss the last page with my logo stamp. There we go. Our first little book made of scrap materials is finished. And I think it turned out pretty great. Now let's move on to our second book. The people have spoken over on Instagram and they liked the olive option. So we're gonna go with that. So first what I'm gonna do is fold all of these papers and then I'm gonna trim them all down to the same size. So it looks like these are all about 3.5 inches. And so is this cover board. We have these two pieces I think we're gonna work with for our covers. This is 5.5. So I'm gonna trim all of these down to 3 inches tall by 5.5 inches wide. Great, so now they're all the same size, and I'm just going to prepare my signatures. So I'm gonna stack 2 sheets per signature. And we did end up with an even amount, so that worked out perfectly. Great, so we have 6 signatures here. These signatures are going to be sewn together, so I need to see if I have any scrap pieces of thread. I do keep some scrap pieces of thread if they're long enough. That way I can use them for simpler sewing projects like pamphlets, because those don't take as much thread. Now this is a smaller book, so I think we might be able to work with some of these. We basically need something that can be 6 times the length of this. So I have a couple of these pink pieces of thread that we can fit together. I also have this mint green thread, which might be the longest. I don't know if there's anything else in here. Okay, so there's actually 2 pieces of green thread here. It looks like this one is the longest. So let's see this one first, if we can get this 6 times the length. Yeah, it looks like this piece will work. Now that I have my needle and thread, I'm going to make a template so I know where to punch the holes in each of these signatures. So this spine is going to be 3 inches tall, and that kind of helps us out because it's a nice round number. We're going to go a 1/2 inch from each end for our starting point. And then I think if we go another 1/2 inch, then that'll give us a 1 inch gap for our French link. Because this is a shorter text block, I think we'll be fine with only 1 link here. So now I'm going to go through each of my signatures and punch the holes with my awl. Right, now my signatures are ready to be sewn. So for my French link, the first signature just needs to be sewn in and out all the way through. Now with this signature, I'm going to create my first link by just going under the previous signature's thread, coming up, and then back into the signature. So my first French link is formed right here, and as I go on through the rest of the signatures, it'll become more prominent. I'm just going to tie a double knot before moving on to the third signature. And now I'm linking through the thread of the second signature. And now you can see the sort of zigzag pattern that the French link creates. And then I'm just tying off the stitch at the end here by looping under and forming a knot. And then I'm just going to finish off this stitch with a double knot. You can see how the French link pattern became more prominent as we added more signatures. So before we glue our spine, we're going to add our end papers. So I'm just going to fold these in half, and then I will trim them down to the same size as the text block. So now I'm just going to take some glue and run it along the edge of my end paper in a very thin line. It doesn't have to be too wide. And then I'll secure it to my text block. Make sure it's lined up square along the spine and press it down for a couple seconds. Now we're ready to glue our spine. So I've propped up my text block so I can easily glue my spine, and we're also going to add some mull to the spine here. And I have a few more scrap pieces that I think can work. Looks like this one will be big enough. Actually, this little piece will work perfectly. So I'm going to add some glue to my spine. And I'm also going to use my finger just to make sure these threads stay down. Now I have my mull positioned in place, and I'm just going to add that extra layer of glue on top. And you can use your finger too, just to make sure it's nice and secure along the spine. Now I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to give the text block one final trimming just to square up all of the paper edges. I'm also going to make headbands for this text block with the olive book cloth. and then we can make the case. So I'm just going to square up the edges of my text block now by trimming off a little bit of the excess paper. Now I'm going to take a scrap of this cloth so we can make the headband. Now this cloth is already paper backed, so I'm not going to add any kozo in here. I'm just going to glue the twine directly onto the cloth. Okay, and let's press this and let it dry for a few minutes. Now let's cut down our headbands to size. And now I'm going to glue the headbands to the spine. Just going to seal it in with some more glue, and then we're going to let it dry before we make our case. So now our text block is dry, and we're going to get a final measurement so we know what size to cut down our book boards to. This is just under 5.5 inches wide and 2 3/4 tall. We can make our book boards 3 inches tall, and we can do 5.5 inches wide. And now we need to measure our spine. See, just under 1/2 inch. Okay, and this is exactly 2 inches wide. So I'm just going to find the center point. Now let's glue down the boards, starting with our spine piece. And now gluing on the cover boards. Okay, now I'm going to need 2 pieces out of this paper for each side of the cover. So I'm just going to fold it in half and cut down the middle. Now our case is ready and we can case in our text block. Now I'm just going to add my wax paper and put it under some weight to dry. So not only was I able to make one book out of my scraps, but I was able to make two. So I'd say this challenge was a success. Let me know which book you like best.